Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Distorted. Before we get started today, I want to introduce my co-host today. Ashley Kelly is going to be with us today. And Ashley and I go way back. But let me give you a little bit of background about her. She is very much involved in her community. She's a leader. She has worked with many different companies, entrepreneurship. She's always been someone who's been promoted up into leadership. She's got a lot of good qualities. She is a master's in counseling. She's also working in tech companies. She works nonprofit. She's currently a CEO of a tech company, and she's got a team that's all trained up. So what she's doing now is transitioning into more of her family businesses that she's doing. She has quite the family, 4 little ones, some dogs, a great husband, we've been friends for a while. And full disclosure, she worked with me a long time ago, so we're colleagues and friends. Happy to have her on the podcast today. So, Ashley, say hello to the folks, and we'll jump in.
Thank you so much for having me, Lenny. I'm excited to be here. And as you mentioned, we got the opportunity to work together, and I got to see firsthand all the lives that you're impacting. So I'm really excited to be a part of this.
Awesome. So we talked obviously before, and what we want to talk about today is obviously I'm not a mother, if you didn't figure that out. And I wanted to bring somebody on who is and who has just the background of the practicality of it, but also through having seen clients, working in business, being a leader. She's seen it from all angles. And one of the things we're interested in sort of unpacking today is we want to talk a little bit about being a mom, especially if you have young children, or if you are a young mom, the stress that comes with that, the juggling of hats that you have to do, especially if you're professional. And then we're going to bring in some of the deeper issues. We might talk about postpartum as a specific issue that comes along with this. And so that's kind of the overview of what we want to touch on. And if Ash, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of a sort of a platform for why this is such an important issue when we talk about moms and child raising and all this, the balance of it all.
Of course, yes. So I think really at the heart of this was when I experienced it firsthand. I've been around a lot of moms. I've nannied. I've babysat. I love kids. So here I was, educated with my master's, married for 7 years, well-adjusted adult, having my first baby, thinking this is going to be great. And it was. And it was something that we had been praying for a long time, anticipating, and how much joy it brought to our lives is indescribable. But at the same time, also with all of that background, all of that experience and being ready, I still wasn't ready. And right. I think it really showed me that there are so many women, moms out there that they are struggling and no one knows. And that's why you see a lot of these news articles when it's too late, or you see moms go crazy, or a lot of moms are on medication. And at the end of the day, a lot of moms are silently struggling because we are happy. We are joyful to be a mom. And it's a really hard thing to rationalize the other side of it, the side that's hard, the side that causes severe anxiety, the side that for some causes depression. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to serve moms in this capacity because there is a lot of struggle there.
Yeah. And a couple of things that popped out. The distortion that's there when you talk about just the pure joy of motherhood and of having a successful pregnancy and having like the first baby, for instance, and so it's certainly coming from a good perspective. Like that's a positive thing all the way around. And then at some point, though, you might start to feel some conflict because you're like, well, wait a minute. As much as this is awesome and I'm just, out of the moon for this, I'm struggling maybe emotionally, right? And so let's talk about that really quick. So what's the thing that becomes the unknown in that? So you have the baby and there's that joy that comes with it, obviously. What are they not prepared for typically? What's the unpreparedness? How does it sort of manifest?
Well, I think that for me and my husband, and also what I've seen with a lot of my friends since then, because now when I know someone that just had a baby, whether it's their first or their fifth baby, I'm reaching out to them immediately, checking in on them, talking to them, because I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Now, hindsight. But when we had our first baby, it's really funny to look back on because we were both so anxious. There was a point in time where I was nursing the baby and my husband was just standing over me, watching, like shaking almost because he was so anxious. I was so anxious.
Right.
And we both laugh about that now because we had no sleep. We had this baby that was ours and it was fully dependent on us for life and for existence. We love this baby so much. And yet at the same time, now our heart feels like it's outside of us. We can't control how we feel anymore because it's wrapped up into this little being. And so it was a lot of just overwhelming emotions mixed with probably postpartum hormones and lack of sleep and just the overall adjustment to this new person in our lives and that we love so much, but now we just felt really out of control.
Yeah, I hear the two components of being the unknown of it and then the dependent piece. So the unknown piece, the idea of if it's the first child, you don't have a plan ahead of time because you don't know how it's going to look or respond. And so you're in that place of obviously the baby needs us. And that's the dependency piece. We'll talk about that. But the unknown is I don't have anything to the common stock of knowledge that we store up in our brains, the recollection of a previous event where we've been able to do this. And pet sitting's not the same, so you have this new form in front of you and that baby needs you for everything. And so the unknown is I'm going to try this thing that I've read about or someone's told me, someone's given me an example or I've seen other mothers do this. But when it's your own, it's unknown because you haven't done it yet. So there's that component, right? And then the anxiety that we've talked about before in previous podcasts, the idea of anticipation of what's to come becomes one of the platforms for anxiety because it's an anticipation of, is this going to go the right way? And if it doesn't, and it's unknown to me already, what am I going to do when that happens? So that piece makes all the sense in the world, that the anxious feeling rises up from the anticipation of, am I going to respond the right way? Am I going to know what the baby needs? Does that sound about right?
It does. And I think it goes even one step further, the unknown of whatever I'm doing now, how is this going to impact them long term? Am I doing the right thing? Am I sleep training, not sleep training? Am I feeding the right way? Am I doing this the right way? And what's the long-term impact of this? And I think there's just all these thoughts bombarding you when you feel like you're the one that has to make all these decisions and you're not quite sure how this is going to impact your child long term. So it can feel very overwhelming and lonely. It actually feels really lonely.
Which is an amazing thing. It's that other idea of the contradiction of you have so much joy going on and so much, it's such a positive thing to have done. And obviously other women, especially faith-based women, are going to be very excited for you, but you can still feel separated from them. That's a very interesting point. And we can unpack that a little bit, but I also want to touch on that dependency piece. Having them be a dependent is the known. And so the known part, it's sort of doubled down on the anxiety, is that they need you. You know that you and your spouse are going to be the ones providing the intervention. And so even though the unknown exists, you have the known of saying, well, I'm still going to have to do something. I'm still responsible. I'm still going to have to take action. And so even though I'm not totally committed or understand what the outcome might be, I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to attempt the best thing that I can do. So it's really interesting, the complexity of this. And it's something that we sort of take for granted because, well, I think women have been having babies for a really long time. And so we take it for granted that it's not that simple. Let's dive into that a little bit too, that separation you were talking about, that you can still feel lonely. You want to unpack that a little bit if you can?
Yes. So I found it really interesting myself because here I am now. I have a child that is with me 24/7. So I am the furthest thing from being alone than I've ever been in my life.
Right.
And yet I felt more alone than I ever have in my life. And I think a lot of that had to do with my husband was traveling at the time for work. So he would be away on business trips. We did not live near family. And we lived in a large metro area where a lot of people geographically were about 20, 30 minutes away. So I didn't have this tight-knit community at the time where I was engaging with other people throughout the day in person. And
Right.
so it felt very isolated, because now here I am taking care of this child full time, and I'm hyper aware that I'm doing it alone. Everything that I'm doing for this child is alone. I don't have anyone helping me. So I think you're more heightened to being alone because you are full time invested in this child. And so even in the past, when my husband would be traveling for work, I wasn't really very lonely because I would be doing my own thing. I would be engaging in self-care, going out with some friends, doing other things that created purpose and value and entertainment in my life. Whereas now I was very much aware that this partner that I have in this is now gone and I don't have anyone else supporting me. So I became really aware very quickly how important community is for moms, how important it is to force yourself to get out of the house. And it's a huge necessity, I believe, when someone is preparing to have children, to really identify who that, they say you have a village, it takes a village, who that is for you, and making sure that it's not just someone digitally that you can connect with, but really having daily interactions with people in person, I think is a complete game changer for moms.
Yeah, I love that point. I know there's women watching that would definitely be able to, that hits them in that place of, that's absolutely correct. It seems, I guess it seems counterintuitive for some people though, when you're raising a child, that you feel isolated and you don't realize that, the very thing that might be difficult to do, which is to reach out for support, it has so many levels of healing, just to not be alone in that struggle. Because again, it's the dichotomy of, this is a joyful thing, this is a positive thing, but it's stressful, and it takes the energy that you have to put into it, and that is draining. Even though it's a we'd say it's like a good kind of drain, but it's nonetheless, and so the physicality of it, and the emotional drain it takes on you, because you're constantly feeling the love, but at the same time that's draining. Nobody can sustain those things forever, for sure, right? And then you might feel guilty. Why am I not sustaining my love? Why am I not sustaining my energy? Why am I not always on? And then add a second child or a third child. So there's so much to this. It's very interesting to me. The idea of communion, of finding other women or, groups of people that are maybe also going through the same thing, or just to be able to say, I have someone else with me that I can share the experience with.
Yes.
And then I think it's interesting too. We can talk a little bit about what happens when we multiply, when we have a second or a third, and the idea behind what are the additional complications of that, maybe. And I don't want to jump too fast through it, but I think that's another significant piece. Yes, to have multiple. Yeah, maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
Well, I think at least in my case, so for me, the transition from 0 to 1 was the hardest, but it's different for everyone, right? Because everyone has different contributing factors into that. By the time I had my second, I was living closer to family. We had moved. My husband was now not traveling as much for work. We had the pandemic. So you have all these other variables.
Yeah, the variables changed. Yeah.
And so for me, I felt more support, and I also had more knowledge going into it. Like you said, I had done this before. So for me, the second time around was easier. Now, that's not always how it goes for people, though, because sometimes when you are adding a second to the mix and you're still caring for your first, now you have an extra stressor on of how do I navigate this dynamic where now I have my older child who needs me, but I have a newborn that's completely dependent on me for life, literally. literally.
Right.
So it is a very complex scenario where you're adding on and then you're still experiencing postpartum hormones, anxiety, depression, depending, to what extent. And now you have multiple kids that you're taking care of. And then that just continues to be compounded, I believe, with the more children that you have. For me, the transitions always seemed easier. Actually, I think the fourth was probably my hardest.
You heard that right, folks. 4.
Yes.
Amen.
And I think there's just so many unknowns, like you are saying. It's the unknowns of what is this going to be like, because you really don't know. You can have a happy baby, a fussy baby, and there could be no rhyme or reason for it. And then you're going crazy trying to figure out, why is my baby crying? Thankfully, I never had a baby with colic, but I can only imagine. Now that brings another level when you're listening to your baby cry for 3 hours on end and there's nothing you can do to help it. That'll make anyone feel like they're going crazy. So there's a lot of facets to this as you multiply the kids and the family dynamics change.
So obviously some of those variables you can't control. You already said that. And so rather than try to, we're not going to try to touch on everything. Obviously, we don't have the ability to touch on every single thing. What are some of the things that, again, you saw through your time in therapy when you were working with clients and some of the practical experience of other mothers? The balance, let's talk a little bit about the balance between like work life and home life, and then we can end it with talking about like the self-care component. But can you talk a little bit about the balance of, especially for the professional moms that are child raising but also working? Can you talk a little bit about that whole dynamic and what that adds to this, and the stress of it, and how to navigate it maybe?
Yes. So for me, with my first, I went back to work full time at 12 weeks. And it's different for everyone. I have a friend who has 6 months maternity leave, which is rare in America. And she was very grateful that she could take that. But most women can't. It's usually, I think, about 6 to 12 weeks, depending on what your company provides for you. So now you're having to look into childcare. You're looking into how are you going to feed your baby if you're nursing? Are you going to be pumping? Are you going to be doing formula? So there's a lot of different unknowns, even within that transition, that can cause anxiety and fear. You also see right now on social media, with the power of social media also comes more thoughts, more fears, more anxiety in some ways, because you're getting so much information. It's information overload, and it's all opposing information. So one video you might see will say the worst thing you can do is put your child into daycare before they're age 3. And then you might see another article saying how social engagement and things of that nature are really positive for the child. Or you might see how putting your child into school is so last year and you need to be homeschooling. And so there's just all of these combating thoughts, and moms, I think at the end of the day, they all, most of them, want to do what's best for their child, but it's really hard to know what is best for their child, because there may be reasons why mom has to go back to work. And if that's the case, then that is what's best for the child, right? That we can provide meals and food and shelter for our children. And even
you might want those things.
Yes. And even if your income is that you don't have to go back, but you're choosing to go back, because for me at the time, it was helpful financially, but it was also something that I felt for my mental health, I needed to go back to work. That's my passion. That's where I wanted to be. And so I went and found a job that I felt comfortable. I actually changed jobs after I had my first daughter, and I was able to find a job working from home where I could still nurse the baby. I would be present in the home, even though I would have extra help at the home. I would be tag teaming it, and it wouldn't be so much as me physically being removed from my child and not seeing her for 8 to 10 hours a day. So everyone has a different situation, but what I would say is this, is that at the end of the day, you as a mom are going to do the best that you can for your child, given the situation that you are presented with. And I think only you can make that decision. And then you have to trust that if you and your partner are making that decision together, that that decision is going to be blessed and your children are going to thrive. And the thing is you can change course. I know that for me, every time I had another child, I cut back hours, I changed different positions, I did different things so that I could have more time with my kids, because as you have more kids, the time you have one-on-one with each child also shortens. And so I was spreading myself more and more thin, and I wanted more and more time with them. So for me, it looked like with each child I had, cutting back hours at work. And thankfully, I was able to do that. Not everyone is able to do that. Sure. And that's okay too. So I think that it's just a matter of realizing that your child is going to be okay, and that not every decision you're making right now is going to affect them as an adult. I think that's kind of like maybe a fear that a lot of moms have, and a lot of decisions can affect them as adults, even that you're making when they're little. And so it's a scary thought.
Yeah, but so much of that, though, would be that's the unknown category. Like so much of that is the variables that start to pile up as life goes on. Some of those things are going to be from outside influences, and we start getting into that. It's very difficult to predict how a child is going to take whatever it is that we've brought to them, and then how it's going to manifest later on. So you spoke on this a bunch of times, and I think it's a great time to talk about it. Here's what I hear, and then you can tell me if I'm off, but I hear with all the things that would have to be dealt with, if you want to use that word, the mom is the center of it. And it's, here's what I'm getting at. The self-care component, how you take care of yourself, even though you're doing child raising, even though you might be working in addition to that, that the best that you can give, which is what I would imagine everybody wants to do, has to start with something. And I'm thinking that what it starts with is you have to have a sense of, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to find that space for myself so I can do the child things that need to be done, the raising and the intensity of engagement? And how am I going to be able to balance that if it's full-time work or part-time work? How am I going to build up my resiliency so I don't feel guilty if a child goes to childcare and I'm not the one overseeing that? And all those battles. Let's talk a little bit about the pies, if you remember the pies from way back when we were working together. I think it's important to sort of mention these four things as a way to help mom stay intact while going through all of this, right? Would you agree that that's super important to this whole thing?
Oh, definitely.
So I'll start us off, and then you can kind of just kind of jump in. The physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual components. What's from a mother's perspective, the significance of those things as they're applied to your ability to then be able to do the care and the investment in your children and work?
I love that. I love the pies because it really helps you categorize the various areas of self-care. A lot of times we may just think of one of those areas, but as you have taught me and others, you really have to look at it holistically because we are a whole person. And I think moms neglect that big time. They may just say, okay, this is my immediate physical need to have a minute of sleep, but they're still missing out on all of those other areas that you mentioned. So I think it would benefit a young mom, a new mom, a seasoned mom to really identify and to write those down and really identify the areas of their self-care and ideas and brainstorm ways that they can tap into each of those areas. It's the idea of you can only pour in if your cup is full, right? You can only pour into your kids if your cup is also full. If your cup is empty, you have nothing to give. And I think that it is a constant struggle, I know, among a lot of my friends and myself, and I've had to work through these distortions myself, is that, well, I feel guilty leaving my child because I already don't see them when they're at school, or I don't see them when they're at daycare. I don't see them when I decide that I'm going to go on a date night. So I feel bad doing anything else other than work at this point. I can't even go on a date with my husband because I feel guilty about that.
Right.
And that is just distorted thinking, because at the end of the day, if you want to be the best mom that you can be, giving your kids an amazing marriage is one of the best things that you can give to your kids.
Sure.
And if you want to prioritize your children, actually prioritizing yourself and your marriage are going to inevitably prioritize your child's best interest.
Right, because they're going to get a better version of you.
Exactly. And they're getting a better overall version of a family and the care and nurturing that that can bring. And I had to challenge my own thinking in that. And because of that, really consistently engage in self-care. Now, that also does look different depending on where you are in your postpartum journey. When you are in those first few months, self-care almost goes out of the window because you are almost in survival. Your baby is feeding nonstop. You're just trying to sleep any chance you can get. And I think you need to give yourself grace at that season, because
the first 6 months, the baby gets whatever the baby needs.
Yeah, the first 6 weeks at least. So it's definitely just more of that harder time. But I always tell people it gets better. And that after those first 6 to 8 weeks, that's up to you. Because I know moms that continue to live that way until their children are 2, 3, 4 years old, and their children are still running the world and the household. And one of the things, I have a really good pediatrician, and he always tells me, he says, Ashley, in the beginning, they rule the house, right? They're the king or queen. But eventually, they're part of a family now. You're not raising an individual, you're raising a family. And you have other priorities now. And that's okay, and that's healthy, and that's good for that child to understand that, because the world isn't going to revolve around them their entire lives. And we need to put their developmental needs sometimes before our emotional need to see them be happy or whatever the case is. For example, my son wasn't sleeping through the night by 7 months old, and my pediatrician strongly felt that he's developmentally ready, he's healthy, he was overweight, way over the 99th percentile. Right. So he was getting more than enough food. In fact, he was getting too much food and nursing constantly. And he said, your need for him to be happy is not more important than his developmental need to sleep through the night, to have a better eating schedule, and to be adjusted. And that really stuck with me, and it hit me because I needed that.
It's a great example. Yeah. In self-care isn't selfish. You know, it's the idea that I'm not going to always be taking care of myself and the child's sitting in a chair somewhere, you know, zombied out. We're not talking about that level of, but self-care is the facilitator for you to be engaged, for you to be able to have energy for the needs that they have, to be able to, you know, to rise up, to physically engage and emotionally be able to stabilize and intellectually be able to, you know, answer questions that they have, you know, and spiritually be able to pray with them. And I think it's interesting to say, and I think people need to hear that, taking care of yourself is not selfish. The guilt, and you said the distortion, the guilt you're experiencing, if you haven't done anything wrong, guilt is your red flag that there's a distortion going on. Something in your brain is telling you you've done something wrong, and guilt's manifesting. And you have to really challenge that idea that if I took 5 minutes to deep breathe, or to let some tears out, or to eat an apple, or whatever it is that you're doing, that is okay. And your child is going to benefit from that resource that you gave to yourself. If you read a scripture, or if you even, I've seen a lot of moms doing this, like when you go for a walk with your children, that's self-care, but it's also investment into the children. So, you know, even if you're pushing a stroller, you're moving, you're benefiting yourself, and you're still you're still with your child. So I think there are ways to incorporate both of these things at the same time, to recognize the importance of, as a mom, I'm still a woman. I'm still a person. I'm still whoever I was before this all happened. And we can talk about relationships on another podcast. But even that concept of, I'm still an individual who chose this person to be with, and they're still an individual who chose to be with me. And I think respecting the idea that moms need time, and this is for the dads out there. You got to chip in. If you go to a job and it's outside the home, when you come home, you're still on. You get a transition break for sure. But a transition break's not 7 hours and you go to bed. That's not a transition break. That's just a break. So,
and that's a good point that you make too, Lenny. Just one last thing I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned dad and mom, and you asked about being a working mom and that dynamic. Right. I think one of the challenging things for women today, at least for me, when I was in a working environment, is the difference of how it is if you have your kids around and you're at work versus your husband. So for example, this is just an example in my own life. When one time I was on a Zoom call and one of my clients heard the baby in the background on audio and mentioned, just kind of giggled and said oh, I guess, the babysitter's off duty today or something like that. Well, then one time, Ben, my husband, he had our baby literally sitting on his lap on video. Right. And I mean, he's done this many times. I would never dare do that, because this is why the difference, right? The comments he would get, oh my goodness, what an amazing dad. You're so great working and balancing the baby. That's incredible. Oh, she's so cute.
Right.
So it's just so interesting that
gave him permission.
Yes, we do face different challenges, and that's okay too. That's not to cause resentment or frustration, but to say, listen, there are stereotypical roles that we have in our society. Yeah. And we as women, now that a lot of us are also in the workforce, that we face these new challenges and these different perceptions. And we're trying to figure out how to navigate that while following the pies, right? While taking care of ourselves. And that is, I think, how you get through that, right? Is focusing on those areas. And like you said, you're modeling that for your children. That's a really big buzzword today of modeling emotion regulation and all these different things for your kids. Well, are you modeling self-care? Are you modeling how to prioritize what's important for you, for your children too? So I think there's just a lot that goes into that.
Yeah. And obviously there's more to it, but we just kind of wanted to touch the surface on this. And, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you'd like a follow-up to this, let us know, obviously, and however you follow and however you subscribe to these things. I'm not a savvy guy at this stuff, but whatever you guys need to do, follow us up. We appreciate you being here. Ashley, thank you so much for your time
today on this. Me.
And we'll love to see you again on another one. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.